Welcome to the last Thursday in Privacy, the digital event series produced by Data Protection World Forum and sponsored this month by Microsoft. My name is Richard Merrigold, Managing Consultant and Data Protection Officer for iStorm Solutions, and I'll be anchoring for a number of today's webinars. Please remember to join the conversation and engage with other attendees using the hashtag LTIP on Twitter and LinkedIn. We're joined by attendees from all over the globe and from companies including FedEx Express, HSBC, Jaguar Land Rover, and many, many more. We've got a full day of talks in store with over 20 sessions available to view either live or on demand if you missed the live sessions. The next session we have today is Data Protection Index, the voice of the UK profession, which will be hosted by Rob Masson, CEO of the DPO Centre, founder of the DPO Centre, and with over 30 years of business experience, Rob is a veteran entrepreneur and thought leader who has been involved in delivering solutions and services to some of the world's largest and most respected companies. He's advised a broad range of organisations on the most effective strategies to meet their goals, and is an expert advisor on compliance with data protection regulations. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much. I wasn't expecting the introduction there, but that's much appreciated. So thanks, Richard. Good morning and welcome. My name is indeed Rob Masson, and I'm the CEO of the DPO Centre, and I'm your host for this morning's session. As hopefully most of you are aware, the DPO Centre and Data Protection World Forum launched the UK Data Protection Index earlier this month. The index is a regularly repeating survey that consists of a panel of data protection officers who provide basic details on themselves and their role, alongside providing their opinion on a range of topics that affect the privacy sector. The purpose of the index is to provide insights that will assist DPOs in their role and act as a consistent and accurate guide for the ever-evolving issues within the privacy sector. So if you are a data protection officer and you've not yet joined the panel, I would certainly encourage you to do so. If you simply visit www.thedpindex.com, you should be able to find the necessary details. So the purpose of this morning's session is to share with you some of the very preliminary headline results that the index is delivering, and to provide the fantastic panel that we've got for you this morning with the opportunity to discuss their views on these results. So it's very much my privilege this morning to be joined by a panel of senior data protection officers who I'm now going to hand over to provide each of them with an opportunity to introduce themselves and provide some insight into their role. So I'm going to go via let's go ladies first. Noreen, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Rob. Hi, I'm Noreen Hussain. I'm the Data Protection Officer at Virgin Media. I am one of many, I think, in the profession now who didn't start off or you didn't start off in data protection or privacy. Found myself by accident, happy accident, I hope. I was an employment lawyer for most of my career. Touched upon privacy issues where they reared their head in the employment context. And back then, when I was an employment lawyer and a privacy issue would come across my desk, I'd grimace and pass it over to the privacy team. It was only when I started getting involved in the lead up to GDPR in the organisation I was working in then that I actually thought, actually it's quite an interesting topic. It is the perfect combination of being extremely complex and difficult in the abstract, but I think the challenge I enjoy is bringing it to life and applying it to practical scenarios, finding solutions that kind of achieve the right balance. So it was right up my street, and so since then I've not looked back really. Great,
thank you. Joseph, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah, let me just unmute myself. Hello, Joseph Gaunt. I'm the Group DPO at William Hill. So hopefully you'll know us as a betting and gaming organisation. I'm responsible for our UK and retail and online operations, as well as our rest of the world, and including our US sites as well. Previous background in the cruise and travel sector, as well as renewable energy, and prior to that holding a number of consulting DPO roles. So I very much started my life in the world of data protection as a technologist, mainly around security, and then going into the more legal compliance of data protection.
Perfect, thank you. Andrew.
Good morning. Sorry about that, my phone slipped. Good morning, my name is Andrew Goodfellow-Swap. I'm DPO for HS2, or High Speed Rail project. I've been working in data protection. I've pretty much fell into it in 2006, dealing with subject access requests at a large unitary authority, and really cut my teeth on redacting social care files for a good while. And basically just learned that this was something that I enjoyed. I enjoyed answering the questions, dealing with unpicking the puzzles that people presented to me. And that continued throughout all of this time. It's people present you, whichever organization you're with, people present you with a puzzle, and it is your job to kind of unpick it and get to the heart of it and provide some real good advice on that. And yeah, very much enjoy it. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Stuart.
I'm Stuart Freeman. I work for the DPO Centre with Rob. So I'm an outsourced DPO. I work with a number of large corporate clients, including Hyundai, amongst others. My background is in actually criminal law. Having been in criminal law for a few years, I moved into compliance. And then eventually when GDPR started coming about, I thought that was going to be a very interesting place to be. So I started getting involved, and before I knew it, I was really into it. I think the whole data protection is absolutely fascinating because it's still quite a young industry, and so it's constantly evolving, as we can see with Privacy Shield, and every day there's a new challenge, it would seem.
Perfect, thank you. And by no means least, Matt.
Hi there, hi. So I'm the Data Protection Officer at London Borough. I've been involved in information governance on and off since 2003. I've attempted to escape at various times, but I've been caught or lured back. So my background is predominantly in local government. I started off as a litigation solicitor dealing with ASBOs and so on, and then I moved into the information governance sphere. And yeah, I've been predominantly working for local authorities, dealing with a range of privacy law matters, from DPIAs to data breaches to subject access requests to data sharing agreements, data processing agreements, information asset register portals, really the whole range of things really in local government spheres.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. So we're reasonably tight on time today, so I'm going to jump straight in with the first question. So the index asks each panel member to indicate on a scale of 1 to 10 how compliant they feel their organisation is with UK data protection laws. Now, the majority indicate between 6 and 8 on that scale, which is probably reasonably expected. However, nearly 21% suggest their organisation is either 9 or 10 on that scale, with 10 being entirely compliant. So, Andrew, if I can maybe come to you first. In your experience, do you feel that that level of compliance is achievable?
I think it will only ever be an aspiration. Organisations change and develop. I mean, particularly at HS2, where we're constantly changing and moving forward. But staff leave and join, responsibilities are created and shifted, contracts start and finish. And all of those basically mean that your current state of the nation, if you want to call it that, can change from one day to the next. And any of those factors could have an impact on the level of your overall compliance. What I think is the critical element is whether an organisation has the capability of being compliant. Does it have the right people, the right tools, controls, processes, procedures, all of that? and essentially the right oversight of its data to identify and respond to those changes effectively. I mean, for HS2, I think I'd probably rate as about an 8. Maybe that's, you know, maybe I'm being generous. You know, I'll leave that to the ICO to decide. But we have, you know, we've put a lot of work into making sure we have the mechanisms and tools in place that provide me as DPO the oversight and ability to analyze the controls across the organization. Added to that, we've got frequent engagement with information asset owners, data owners, and owners of business processes. Gaps do exist. There is always work to do, particularly on the records of processing, but we understand where those gaps are and we understand how to address them. And that's certainly a substantial improvement on where we were, certainly when I joined HS2 in 2017.
Okay, great. Matt, maybe come to you next.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, I would like to answer that and say we're a 12 out of 10. It's an interesting question because, I mean, what is perfection? Who is a perfect person? What is a perfect car? I don't think it's a question you can readily answer, and it's all about really trying your best. One thing I try and do is whenever I give training or speak to people, I ask whose responsibility is information governance, and then there's a pregnant pause and I wait for the answer, and I actually say, well, it's everybody, it's all of your responsibilities. So we're very lucky where I work because one of our core values, key behaviors, is taking ownership. So I try and embed it into that process, saying information governance is everybody's responsibility. And then I give examples from, you know, their own lives. How would you feel if X, Y, and Z happened to you in your personal life? So it's about embedding it at an early stage that everybody takes ownership and it's everybody's responsibility, and building the bricks from that point, really.
Absolutely. Anybody else got an opinion on that?
I'd just like to add, I think it depends on your scope as an organization. I think that was touched on. You know, if you are potentially a one-man band DPO consultancy, I'd probably expect you to be 100% GDPR compliant. But if you are a very complex enterprise with legacy technology that transfers data to the US and all of the other good stuff, then I would say it's harder to be compliant. But as some of the other panelists mentioned, it's all about how you approach it and how you approach those difficulties.
My point is actually a development on what Joseph just said around the context of the organisation. I think it's I think it's about how you define compliant as well, because that means different things to different people, and it depends on the culture of the organisation on the one hand and the risk tolerance on the other, which is why I actually really enjoy my job and the subject matter, because it is constant risk assessment, and you have to, it's an iterative process, so you can't just say, you know, that's an 8 out of 10 risk wise, so we're going to treat it this way because next week, you know, this is a timely session, isn't it, because of what's happened with Schrems too, but anyway, even outside of that landmark judgment, every week is different, so you have to keep really close to it. And I think, a bit like what Matt said, you make it a personal responsibility, but in order to make it, for that to land, people have got to really understand what it means to them in their day-to-day life and in their day-to-day job. And I think if you can crack that nut, you can get comfortable even if you're not 100% compliant.
Indeed.
Having worked in, well, I'm working in a number of organisations, I do see quite a wide range of compliance. I would say you go from 10 out of 10, if I was to be generous, maybe to 5 out of 10. And I think it really depends, A, on the culture, and B, a lot of it also depends on what type of business they are. If businesses I tend to find that are more heavily involved in marketing tend to find more challenges than, say, other businesses.
Excellent. Okay, that's really good. Thanks very much. Let's maybe look at the next question. So we asked respondents to indicate how confident they are in the effectiveness of the ICO as a regulator, which is probably always going to be quite a good one. The good news is that the weight of opinion suggests that they are effective. However, over 31% suggest they are less than effective. So, Stuart, maybe given your dealings that I'm aware of with the ICO, how do you see their effectiveness from your perspective?
I think it depends on what your expectations are of the ICO. If you're looking at the ICO as a source of knowledge, a source of information, and for guidance, they're pretty good at the moment. If, on the other hand, you're looking at them from the point of view of enforcement, I would say most people I speak to have been a little bit surprised at the lack of enforcement since GDPR has come in. Obviously, there's been two big cases with BA and Marriott, and there's also been the Facebook issue. And what it does seem to me and other people I speak to is now that the fines are so huge, whereas in the old days, a company would probably just take 200,000, 500,000 on the chin. When it's 190 million, they are huge resources at fighting that, as you can see with Facebook, BA and Marriott. And I think looking at it, that's causing the ICO some issues in terms of how do they finance that themselves when they're going up against these big corporations, because they don't get to keep the fines. So they're spending their resources, which are limited, trying to raise, obviously to impose fines on organisations which won't come to them. And I do feel that has made them a little bit reticent to take on bigger organisations. So in that respect, if we're saying, are they good from a support point of view? Yes. Are we, in terms of enforcement, I think the jury's probably still out. I think I guess
that's even more acute, isn't it, for the Irish DPC, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, apparently the ICO is Europe's best funded data protection regulator. So, but even still, when you're going up against the likes of Facebook and their corporate lawyers, it's a very, very expensive business. And pragmatic view with Facebook, that decision they came to was a very pragmatic decision based on the fact they didn't want to spend huge amounts of money when at the end of the day it was a maximum £500,000 fine.
Indeed. Joseph, you were nodding there. Can I come to you next?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'll kick off by saying I think the ICO have got a very difficult job, and operating in the environment they do. They take a lot of flack, I think, and some of it you could argue, potentially justified. Some of it, I think, not really relevant. But I think the point on what's the measurement of effectiveness is really key. Is it defending people's rights and responding to complaints that people make? Is it issuing guidance, which I agree that they are good at and very good at compared to some other regulators? Dealing with breaches or fining and understanding that criteria for fines. But plus all the other stuff they've got to do around freedom of information and everything else as well. I think they do the best with what they've got at the moment, and I try and defend them as much as possible. In terms of my dealings with them, I've always found them to be really pragmatic, and they operate within the space that they can operate in, and I think that they've been really good. But I also think effectiveness will depend on who's talking about effectiveness. Privacy groups and people that want to see enforcement of regulations and large fines might have a different idea and understanding of what effectiveness might mean for a regulator. Organizations might have a very different view where we'd want clear guidance and kind of more carrot than stick, and a bit of understanding about what we do. I think the really interesting thing for the ICO is going to be, as we move away from being in the EU and kind of that consistency mechanism isn't going to be in place after the big B, what kind of regulator are they going to be? And will they be promoting British interests and be supportive of the economy and what we're trying to achieve? Or would they go the other way and be a very tough regulator on British business? And I think that's going to be a really interesting time for them.
Excellent. Okay, can I maybe take just maybe one more opinion, just to keep us on track time-wise?
I'm just going to say, I think organisations now aren't driven by or influenced just by the position that the ICO is going to take, because often actually the bigger threat is the risk of civil litigation, the significant adverse PR risk. Consumers, data subjects are, although there is this privacy paradox still, I don't think it's as pronounced as it used to be. I think people are taking their privacy more seriously and would maybe vote with their feet if there was a significant privacy issue with an organisation. So I think that there are multiple ways to skin a cat, and the position that the ICO take in enforcement is one aspect, but it's certainly not the single driver towards being more compliant and taking a more of a privacy first approach.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can I just add something there? I think one of the difficulties for the ICO is that under the Data Protection Act, I think it's section 162, the ICO can effectively be bypassed now, and aggrieved individuals, data subjects, can go straight to court without a finding from the ICO, and they may never have been involved in the matter, which puts them in a slightly awkward situation, which is unusual and it's challenging.
Indeed. Okay, thanks very much for that. Let's move on to the next one. So Index members were asked how confident they are of being able to adequately advise their organisation regarding data protection legislation being introduced globally. A very confident 26% indicated either 9 or 10 on that scale, which seems quite challenging considering the amount of new legislation that's appearing globally. So Noreen, do you have a view on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd like to know who's in that 20-odd percent. I might want to tire them.
Private.
I mean, I certainly won't put myself in that category. I think it's becoming increasingly challenging, actually, with, I mean, we are VM is a UK-based business. My previous organisation was a global business. But even within VM, we're part of a wider group, and we have regular discussions with the DPOs from the other countries and with group to talk about issues that apply to all of us. But what's always really fascinating is actually quite the significant differences, particularly UK being common law legal system compared to some of the civil based legal systems in Europe. Some significant differences, particularly when it comes to employee data and processing of employee data. It just makes me realise how challenging it is to be across all of those jurisdictions. So DPOs of organisations who have responsibility for different territories, I don't envy their task. I also think that particularly with COVID and the impact it had on our business, for example, because a lot of our back office and some of our care staff for care services are operated through partners out of other countries. And also now with post Schrems 2 situation, having to be across international data flows, but not just so that we can tick the box that we've got standard contractual clauses in place, but actually have to understand something of that country's national surveillance laws, which I never thought I'd have to do as an employment lawyer or as a DPO. I think it makes the issue even more important. And certainly from my perspective, I would, we are going to have to, as I think most organisations find themselves in now, is having to go out and get some external specialist support in some of those other territories. And it's not just other countries in Europe; it is global. So I think it's a real challenge. I think that it's going to impact on, dare I say, DPO budget and that conversation that we have to have every year. It's not something you can fund out of your existing budget because it's difficult, and it's expensive advice because it's difficult.
Indeed. Actually, Stuart, can I come to you next? I think you're obviously working with a portfolio of clients that have got international interest. What's your view?
I'm working with a client who is launching globally. I would say it's a real challenge. You've got I think you can break it down when you're dealing with international jurisdictions in two. Those that have formal data protection laws, because for them, they seem to be adopting GDPR as their template, so at least you can recognise those laws. And those that don't have any formal data protection laws, such as Saudi Arabia and China, where it can be a real minefield. But even within those countries that have their data protection, formal data protection laws, which are based on GDPR, it's very easy to get caught out because you can lull yourself into the false sense of security that this is GDPR, only to find when you read into it, there is one key difference somewhere in the legislation which will catch you out. Personally, I think when you're entering another jurisdiction, I've been going into a number of jurisdictions, I've always taken local counsel advice simply because it is a challenge. To think everything is like GDPR will cause you problems later on down the line, probably more often than not.
Okay. Just if I can say, if anybody has any questions that arise as we go through, do please put them into the Q&A window. I think you can probably find there should be a little button for it at the bottom. And we'll allocate a few minutes towards the end to try and address any of those. So if anything we're talking about creates any questions, please feel free to put them through. Anybody any final comments on that subject?
I'll probably just add one more small thing. I think DPOs, especially if you're a one-man band, you're not going to know everything. So you have to use the resources available to you. So whether that's external counsel, specialist knowledge, you need to get a hold of them, and you need to communicate to your organization why it's important to do that.
I would totally agree. I mean, we're quite fortunate. We're quite a large team of DPOs, and therefore we've got quite a breadth of knowledge across our team. But even there's still jurisdictions and specific issues that arise that you have to go off and investigate because it's not something that's within your own sphere of knowledge. So certainly that's why it's one of these questions that was very interesting to me. In that there are people that consider themselves to have global knowledge, which for me is quite a stretch.
I think also I'd say as a DPO, I think it's really important to be really clear in the organisation what your roles and responsibilities are and where the accountability for that sits, because I think that's that paves the way for a much simpler conversation when it comes to seeking funding money to go and get some specialist legal advice, because if accountability for that sits with that particular business unit who's managing the supplier relationship, for example, they're best placed to make that decision, and then I think it makes the task of the DPO a lot easier.
Indeed. Okay, let's move on. So respondents were asked, within your organisation, do you think the importance of complying with privacy and data protection laws has increased or decreased as a result of COVID-19? The results so far indicate that almost 60% believe the significance has increased. So Joseph, maybe I'll come to you first. So given all the negativity around COVID-19, do you think that this should be seen as a bit of a silver lining inside the privacy industry? Short answer, yeah, I think so. I would say that COVID-19 definitely brought to light how we handle people's data, and it brought it to light to everyone, because a global pandemic impacts everyone in every organization. So, I recall having conversations with people and we were talking about, what data do we collect on staff when they come into the office? What do we need? And I often found that people came to the right decisions of their own accord because it was fundamentally the right thing to do. We early stage conversations started as let's collect everything, and then they moved to, well, let's think about this. And I think the silver lining there is that if that mentality continues into other operations that people have got, whether it's your sales, marketing, information governance side of things, new projects and processes, that idea of doing the right thing for people will help organizations comply with data protection laws. And I think as DPOs, we're very resourceful people. I think the comment was made that we often operate quite lean
departments, and we'll use anything that we can get to our advantage. And I think there is a big opportunity to use COVID-19 as a test case of what we can do to be compliant. And I think if your organization has dealt with COVID-19 well and done the data protection compliance of it superbly, that's a really good thing to say, well, let's take this to the other parts of the business and see what else we can implement. If it's not been as good, then you can do the whole lessons learned piece. And using a combination of all of that, I think you can use COVID-19 for positive reasons, for data protection compliance. But I think that also depends on the attitudes of your organization as well, and what that tone from the top is, what other people are saying about it. Because if you're not processing up personal data, it might just be flash in the pan. Yeah, we've done it. Let's move on to the next one, which I think is a bit of a wasted opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, maybe come to you next.
Yes. Firstly, my apologies. I think we've got a delivery in the background and my dog is going wild. When I saw this question, the first thing that came to my mind was, why does anyone think that compliance has become more or less important than it was before? If you're looking at your organization and you're thinking that COVID has increased the importance of data protection within it, then possibly, maybe its importance wasn't high enough to begin with. That said, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to increase the profile of privacy and data protection at all levels, and to use the questions and queries that come to you to raise questions of your own. So if someone comes to you and says, can we gather and hold temperature data, for example, you can of course answer the question, but what you can also do is use it as a pointer to look at and update your existing policies and guidance. So as a push, as an incentive to improve, and I think Joseph's touched on this very well already, then absolutely yes, it is a silver lining in my view.
I think COVID has raised the profile of data protection in many ways, because it got most companies thinking about when they had to work from home, about how they were going to protect their data, when sometimes they had just made assumptions previously, and how they were going to interact with staff. Then they had the day-to-day issues of having to deal with COVID and handling special category data possibly. And I think even if you look at a sort of in a wider view, the fact that the government really has found it hard to grapple with data protection in terms of developing track and trace, failing to do a DPIA, it's raised the profile of data protection again. And I think because it's raised the profile, it's now much more in people's minds than it would have been before COVID. Whether it should have been more in their minds or not is a moot question, but I definitely think it's made it much more in people's minds since COVID has come about.
Any other comments at all?
Oh, I was just going to ask a question really of the group. Is although it's, I agree, it's more in the psyche of the business community, but also nationally. But given why that sensitive and or special category data would need to be processed, and the kind of strength of that, that public health interest, do you think that there's a risk that people might just think, actually, I'm less concerned about my privacy rights because I'm more concerned about my health and the health of, my friends and family. So I'm more likely to just say, yes, have it all, and not question it. I'm probably being a bit flippant there. But I wonder whether that actually could be a negative, potential negative effect on how people's relationship with their data and privacy.
I would absolutely agree. I think it potentially normalizes handing over that kind of data or allowing that kind of data to be used when normally people might be much more reluctant if they are at all. So yeah, I would absolutely agree on that point. I think it's there is a danger there that this becomes, or the situation that we have now becomes, a new normal, a new standard. And I think we as DPOs have a responsibility to maybe keep an eye on that and dial that back where it's appropriate to, or when we can.
Yeah, I do agree. There is almost a feeling that you're doing your part by giving over your data, and I think that's been sold by the government as well in terms of track and trace, giving your details everywhere. Clearly, it is necessary to share this sort of data at the moment to help with COVID. It's what happens when hopefully COVID subsides. Do people's attitudes still stay the same? Or, as you say, Andrew, do people get into a way of thinking where they just feel it's all right to share data because it's in a greater good?
Okay. So I'm just going to move on to, I'll just pose one final question and then we'll move on to, we've got a couple of Q&A questions that have come through, which we'll just deal with in the last kind of 5 minutes. But one of the further questions that's, opinions that's sought within the index is, panel members are asked to indicate if they think UK data protection laws ultimately promote or restrict UK economic growth. So at the moment, a healthy 51% scored this as 7 or above, so significantly promoting growth. So maybe, Noreen, if I can maybe come to you. So, I mean, given the additional red tape that many see data protection laws such as the GDPR introducing, do you find that a surprising result?
So I should start with saying I'm no economist, so I'm talking just as a layperson. I'm surprised that people felt able to even answer that question, because I would want to understand how we're even measuring that. So I often, and this may be felt across the group and the people watching, I often receive within the business, that hear that remark, oh, we can't do anything. What do you mean? We won't be able to run a business if we had to comply with all these rules. And it just, and I used to get the same as an employment lawyer. And actually, once you get beyond that, that initial reaction and you probe deeper, 99 times out of 100, you get to a sensible solution. It might not have been the solution that the business wanted signed off, but it's an equally acceptable solution to them. And actually, sometimes you take the conversation into a direction that they hadn't thought about. That's yeah. I'm not going to say win-win because that's unrealistic, but it also gets them to a place that they're happy with and comfortable with. So, how you would measure the impact, positive or negative, on the economy or the performance of a business that data protection compliance has, I think is really difficult. There are measures, but the reports that I've seen, there was a survey published at the start of the year, I think it was a Cisco one, that kind of talked about return on investment in privacy. It was quite a small survey and looked at various efficiencies and also, avoidance of fines and but again, it's so subjective. So I think it is good to have some within the organisation to have some understanding of the impact that it's having, and I think you can craft some SLAs and some KPIs that can measure that in a way that's meaningful to your organisation. How you extrapolate that to a national impact, I'm not sure. So I suppose in a word, I'm skeptical.
Yeah, I mean, I think the index is it's all about gaining an opinion and then monitoring that opinion over time. And I think it's just a kind of, what's your view? What do you feel? I mean, I think ultimately it comes back to whether data protection done right benefits an organisation. Because it improves processes and the approach, whereas in the good old Wild West days, whether you were allowed to do as you please, whether that actually was ultimately a negative.
Well, I think to that then, and certainly my approach to it and the conversations I have internally within Virgin Media, it's all about how do you align. Let's not have the conversation around privacy and data protection in isolation. Let's talk about it in the context of the brand strategy, the relationship of trust we want to build with our customer. Privacy and data protection done right can enable that relationship of trust, can enhance and become an enabler to the brand. And it's something that I think Joseph said, sorry if I've misattributed this to you and somebody else said it, but about doing the right thing. And I think fundamentally it is about doing the right thing. And the way to get into the conversation is, I think, to start with probably teaching everybody to suck eggs here, but it's just my experience and it tends to land well, is to start with asking that project team, that business team, that marketing team, what do you want to achieve? Like, what's the ultimate aim that you're trying to achieve? Help me understand that, and then I'll help you navigate a path that's acceptable from a data protection perspective. Most often you end up in a place where you're doing the right thing. So I don't personally feel that it is disruptive in the extreme to business, and therefore has a negative impact. I think it turns on the nature in which you have that conversation, and that's something you can say across legal and compliance. Okay. You know, it's not unique to privacy.
I think, just tell you, but it depends really who you talk to in the organisation. Obviously, within any organisation, if you was to speak to somebody who wants to send out tens of thousands of marketing emails without consent, they would see data protection as a block from them doing their job, because it makes, from their opinion, whether it's right or wrong, it makes their job harder, because rather than being able to send out these bulk emails, they're having to think about it, do consentness, etc. But that said, when you look at it from the other point of view, when you explain it, as Noreen says, that if you send out tens of thousands of emails to people who don't want them, you're just likely to upset them anyway. And you explain it that way, often you can make people to understand that data protection is not something that's a negative, it's actually something that will promote the business.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. Is trying.
It can be a challenge sometimes. It's not going to say it isn't. It's
yeah.
I think
Matt, sorry, I was just going to come. We're running. We've only got literally 4 minutes left. So, and I've got one or two questions that I want to just bring up at the end. I don't know whether Matt, did you have a kind of a final opinion on that?
Yeah, I think the only way we can measure it at the moment is anecdotally, and it's like, you know, friends, colleagues, people in the pub when they're open on the street kept talking to us, and nobody, I've been thinking about it, nobody has come up to me and said, oh my God, my business has really suffered because of GDPR. Not a single person. So in that sense, if you measure it just anecdotally, it's not had a negative impact, no.
Okay. Joseph, did you want to just...
I've just got one sentence on this. I think if we look outside the organisation as a society, you know, we have to decide what is our economy going to be based on. And I think data protection regulations, to the extent they're protecting people's fundamental rights, are ultimately positive. And I think that will ensure good practices, but it also helps the economy because it gives other people more control over their data and their information. I think that can only be positive.
Brilliant. Okay. So I just want to bring in one. I guess it's the obvious question that we haven't dealt with specifically today, but we're being asked, what are your plans for addressing the international transfer issues raised by Max Schrems? What solutions do you feel are realistic based on your organisation or a given client? I don't know if anyone's grappling with this specifically today. Andrew, yeah, go for it. You're.
Sorry, yeah, I don't want to seem too smug about this. But essentially, it's a non-issue for HS2. But that's because we have spent many years, due to the nature of the project being a critical infrastructure, many years making sure that our suppliers and our supply chain provide us with resources that are EU or UK based, and increasingly UK based. And so when I look at Brexit or I look at Schrems, I'm thankfully, and I appreciate, I might be quite unique here in a position where I can advise the business and the board that actually this is a bit of a non-issue for us.
But do not all those providers at some point end up on one of the big 5 cloud providers?
They do, but obviously that's where we have our agreements to say you will only host you will only provide services within the UK. So all of our Azure, for example, is all UK based. All of the hardware and the metal, if you like, it's all UK based, and that's been a deliberate decision over several years. I wouldn't want to be in the position of trying to do that from scratch right now.
Sure.
Yeah, that's where you need to review your Article 28 data processing agreements about where you've said that the data will be located. I think that's your starting point. Can I just say something else? I think the starting point is to look at the excellent 11 kBW Panopticon blog. And there's an excellent piece this week from Robin Hopkins, who is involved in the Schrems case. And, you know, he really sums up the issues there. And he is the leading expert, and he was involved in the case. So I think that's a good starting point for people.
Okay. Now, I'm conscious we're pretty much out of time, but if anybody's got just literally a few words to sum up with, if you've got anything final to say.
I'd say on Schrems, I'd say don't panic.
No.
Have a plan, engage your stakeholders, and take a risk-based approach.
And you review your agreements, as I said, as well, isn't it?
Joseph, last word.
No, I think I'd echo what Noreen said. It's, you know, not everyone has the luxury of being solely UK and EU based, so risk-based approach, do what you can, and hopefully with clearer guidance soon.
Perfect. Andrew, can I get a last word from yourself?
Nothing from me. I don't envy my colleagues, my peers' challenges in this area. There's a lot of difficult decisions to be made.
I think as everyone else said, it's not to panic. It's not going to be. There's no possibility that suddenly the taps are going to be turned off between the data flow of US and the UK and the EU. It's just simply too damaging for that to happen. So they will come up with some compromise at some point.
Perfect. Okay. Well, fantastic panel session. Thanks ever so much for your time and input. Very interesting discussion. I think hopefully this is the first of quite a number as the index results kind of grow and evolve over time. So hopefully we'll be revisiting some of these with some different perspectives over time. Richard, back to you.
Thank you very much. So thank you all. It's really, really interesting. Thank you for joining us today. Next up, we have two more interesting webinars. So we have the Brexit series, which I'm sure everybody's already excited about. So talking about GDPR and the future of the UK and data flows post-Brexit. And we also have avoiding the security dangers with work from home, and that's with Mimecast. So if you're not able to choose which one you want to watch, don't worry, because both of those sessions are available to watch on demand for those that have registered. And for the time being, thank you very much to all of you for your participation today. It's a great session, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.